They threw her out of the penthouse she owned. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people say thrown out, when they mean asked to leave, when they mean a raised voice and a slammed door and someone sleeping on the couch. Marcus Hale and his mother Constance stood together in the marble foyer of the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower on a Tuesday morning in January, with a security team at their backs and a document already prepared. And they removed Elena Voss-Hale from the building with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed it. Elena was 7 months pregnant. She had slept in yesterday's dress because Marcus changed the bedroom lock while she was sleeping. The sound she would remember, not the words, not Constance's voice, not the rustle of the document being thrust toward her, was the specific click of the lock engaging. That sound at 3 in the morning in a building she did not yet know she owned. What Marcus did not know, what Constance did not know, what Portia Strand, who had suggested the timing, did not know, was that the name on the lease agreement Marcus had signed 3 years earlier, buried in the fine print of page 11, was Voss Capital Holdings, LLC. And Voss Capital Holdings belonged, in its entirety, to the woman he was escorting to the elevator. This is not simply a story about a husband who chose the wrong woman to underestimate. It is a story about what happens when a man spends 3 years believing he owns something that was never his, and the morning he finds out. If this story is for someone who needed to hear it today, leave a like and consider subscribing. There is more where this comes from. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you are listening from. We love knowing who is in this room with us. Now, to understand what Elena walked out of that morning, we need to understand what her father spent a lifetime quietly building beneath it. To understand what Elena walked out of that morning, we need to understand what her father spent a lifetime quietly building beneath it. Harold Voss did not begin with a tower. He began with a warehouse on the 4100 block of South Halsted Street, a squat, rust-shouldered building that smelled of industrial solvent and river water, purchased in 1974 for $31,000 in cash that Harold had saved over 11 years of working other men's construction sites. He was 23 years old. He owned one suit. He did not tell anyone what he had bought until the deed was recorded, because Harold Voss understood, at 23, what many men never learn, that an ounce power is power already spent. He built slowly. A warehouse became 3 warehouses. 3 became a commercial strip in Bronzeville. The strip became a portfolio. By 1991, the portfolio had a name, Voss Capital Holdings. And by the time Elena was born, in 1990, Harold was already the kind of wealthy that requires a legal team to manage. He simply did not look like it. He drove a 12-year-old Buick. He packed his own lunch. He went to church on Sundays in the same neighborhood where he had once swept other men's floors. And he tithed quietly, without announcement, because that was the Voss way. Elena grew up knowing her father owned buildings. She did not know how many. Harold did not offer the number, and Elena did not ask, because in the Voss house, work was private and worth was demonstrated, not declared. What she knew was the rooftops. On Saturday mornings when she was small, Harold would take her to whichever property he was inspecting that week, and while his site manager walked the floors below, Harold and Elena would stand on the roof and look at the city. She remembered the tar paper warm beneath her sneakers. She remembered his hand on her shoulder, heavy and sure. She remembered the morning she was 12 years old, and she asked him why he never talked about how much he had. And Harold was quiet for a long moment before he said, "A Voss does not announce the river. A Voss is the river. The water moves whether or not anyone watches." She did not fully understand it then. She filed it away the way children file their parents' wisdom, somewhere interior and inaccessible, to be retrieved decades later when the meaning had ripened into necessity. Harold watched Marcus Hale for 3 years. He never said a word against him. He shook Marcus's hand at the engagement dinner, attended the wedding, held Elena's arm walking down the aisle with the steady composure of a man who had learned to finish every transaction before speaking. He was already sick by then. The diagnosis had come 6 months before the wedding, and Harold had shared it with no one, not even Elena, because there were things to arrange first and arrangements required clarity. Over the following 18 months, between treatments he did not discuss and phone calls with Aldridge and Morrow he did not explain, Harold rebuilt the legal architecture of everything he owned. He separated the trust entirely from any marital claim. He named Elena as sole controlling beneficiary. He built in a single condition, deliberate and precise. The trust documents would not be delivered until Elena was legally separated from the Hale family. Not because Harold doubted his daughter, because Harold doubted Marcus. And he understood that a man like Marcus, a man performing a wealth he did not fully possess, would move against whatever Elena held the moment he felt threatened. Harold died 14 months before the morning his daughter signed the voluntary relocation agreement in a marble foyer on the 42nd floor of a building he had purchased in 2003. He did not know she would be pregnant when it happened. He only knew it would happen. A memory surfaced, there in Priya's spare room. Elena saw the rooftop on South Halsted. She felt the tar paper. She heard the city. She sat on the edge of the guest bed with her hospital bag at her feet and her hands in her lap, and she tried to locate the part of herself that was supposed to feel something. Grief, perhaps, or rage, or the particular despair of a woman who has spent 3 years maintaining a belief that turned out to be incorrect. She found none of those things, not yet. What she found was a stillness so complete it felt structural, as though something inside her had simply closed a door and was standing with its back against it. Priya had left a glass of water on the nightstand. Elena looked at it for a long time. She did not know, sitting there, what the city looked like from the 42nd floor when you owned it. She had looked out those windows for 3 years and seen Marcus's view. It had not occurred to her that the view had always been hers. The narrator will tell you this now, because Elena cannot tell you yet. The building she had just been removed from was asset code VCH0041 in the Voss Capital Holdings portfolio. The Voss family had owned it since 2003. The Penthouse lease agreement, signed by Marcus James Hale and renewed twice, listed the lessor on page 1 and the lessee on page 11. Marcus had read page 11 carefully. He had never read page 1. Elena placed both hands on her stomach. She stared at the wall. Outside, Chicago went about its January business, indifferent and enormous. She had nothing she could name as hers. She did not yet know what that meant. The certified letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Priya had left for her office on West Monroe Street before 7, moving quietly through the apartment so as not to wake Elena, leaving a travel mug of coffee on the nightstand and saying nothing, because she understood, the way people who have known each other for 12 years understand, that Elena did not need words yet. She needed the absence of demands. She needed a room where no one required anything from her. The letter was in the stack of mail Priya had placed on the small table by the door. Elena almost did not open it. The return address, Aldridge and Morrow Estate Division, 233 South Wacker Drive, Chicago, IL 60606, meant nothing to her. She did not recognize the firm. She opened it the way she opened everything those first 3 days, carefully and without expectation, because expectation required a future she had not yet been able to construct. There were 14 pages. The cover letter was 1 paragraph. It explained in language precise enough to cut that Harold James Voss had named Elena Christine Voss as sole controlling beneficiary of the Voss Family Irrevocable Trust, established December 2021, and that per the explicit terms of the trust instrument, the estate documents were being delivered upon confirmation of Elena's legal separation filing from the Hale family, as recorded in the Cook County Circuit Court on January 14th. The trust's assets were detailed in the attached schedule. She was to contact senior partner Diana Reeves at her earliest convenience. Elena read that paragraph twice. Then she turned to the schedule. Voss Capital Holdings, 147 commercial properties across 14 cities. Current portfolio valuation, $2.1 trillion. She turned pages slowly. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was not. Chicago portfolio, page 3. Asset codes VCH011 through VCH089. She ran her finger down the column. VCH039, VCH040, VCH041, Meridian Tower, 980 North Michigan Avenue, Chicago, IL, all floors. Acquired 2003. The room did not tilt. Nothing cinematic happened. Elena simply sat on the edge of Priya's guest bed, in yesterday's borrowed sweatshirt, with her rounded stomach pressing gently against the edge of the paper, and she read the asset code 1 more time. Then she set the schedule down on the mattress beside her and looked at the wall. She had walked through that lobby for 3 years. She had nodded to the doorman, Raymond, every morning. She had thanked the elevator attendant, a young man named Curtis who had once helped her carry groceries when her back was aching in the 5th month. She had signed for packages at the concierge desk and remembered the night staff's coffee preferences and brought Christmas cards to the building manager's office each December, because that was how Elena moved through the world, with attention, with care, with the quiet assumption that the people around her deserved to be seen. She had done all of this in a building that had been hers, in trust, since before she ever set foot in it. Marcus had been paying rent to her father's estate for 3 years. He had signed the lease himself. She did not yet know what she felt. She was not sure the feeling had a name. It was something beneath grief and above fury, and it sat in her chest like a stone that had always been there and had only now made itself known. The story pauses here because this is the moment the audience needs to sit in. Not the ejection, not the document. This. A woman alone in a borrowed room, 7 months pregnant, holding 14 pages that rearrange the architecture of everything that has just happened to her. The irony is not sharp, it is vast. It is the kind of thing that takes a moment to fully enter. She thought of Harold. He had been gone 14 months and she still reached for him the way you reach for a light switch in a room you know well, automatic and then immediately aware of the dark. Harold Voss had not been a demonstrative man. He expressed love through presence and preparation, through the kind of care that builds things rather than describes them. She had known this about him. She had not known until this morning how completely he had applied that love to the years after his death. He had watched Marcus. He had said nothing. He had built a door and locked it and left her the key inside a letter she had not yet found, in a firm she had not yet called, attached to a schedule she had not yet understood. He had done all of this while he was dying, without complaint, without drama, without announcement. A Voss does not announce the river. She heard it in his voice, the particular low register he used when he was saying something he meant for her to keep. She had been 12 years old on that rooftop. She had not known then that she was being prepared. She understood it now. She picked up the cover letter again. At the bottom, below the firm's address, in the senior partner's direct line, Harold had added 3 words in his own handwriting, the familiar blocky print she had grown up reading on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the margins of documents she was never meant to see. The ink was slightly darker than the rest, pressed in harder, the way Harold pressed when he wanted something to last. It said, "Trust Diana. Call." Elena looked at those 2 words for a long time. Then she folded the letter carefully along its existing crease, set it beside the schedule, and sat very still. She had nothing she could name as hers, she had thought 3 days ago. She had not yet read page 3. The letter was still on the bed when Elena fell asleep that night, still there when she woke at 3 in the morning with her back aching and the baby pressing against her ribs and the particular loneliness of a dark room that belongs to someone else. She did not reach for it again. She already knew what it said. She was only beginning to understand what it meant. But that understanding required something first. It required going back. The early marriage was not a lie. That is the part the audience needs to hold on to, because it is the part that makes everything else hurt the way it does. Marcus in the first year was present and attentive in ways Elena had not expected from a man of his particular social architecture. He remembered small things, the name of her college professor she had mentioned once in passing, the way she took her coffee, the specific shade of blue she said she loved in a painting at the Art Institute. He made her feel in those early months like someone worth paying close attention to. She had not always felt that way. She had grown up practical and capable and quietly competent, and she had sometimes confused that with being unremarkable. Marcus convinced her otherwise. That was the gift he gave her, and it was real, and the fact that he later withdrew it deliberately does not make it retroactively false. It only makes it a more precise kind of cruelty. Constance arrived as she always did at an angle. The first thing she changed was the curtains in the living room. This was in the 3rd month of the marriage. She arrived one Tuesday, while Marcus was at his office on LaSalle Street, brought a woman from a design firm on Oak Street, and had the original curtains, linen, ivory, Elena's choice, replaced with something she described as more appropriate to the space. When Elena came home that evening to find the windows dressed in heavy silk the color of old bone, Constance called it a gift. "I know you've been so busy settling in," she said, patting Elena's arm. "I just wanted to help." Elena thanked her. That was how it began. The dinner table operated by its own logic, and the logic was Constance's. At Hale family gatherings, held monthly at a private dining room on the 14th floor of a club on East Delaware, Elena learned the architecture of her own invisibility with uncomfortable speed. Constance controlled the seating. Elena found herself placed, consistently, at the end of the table nearest the kitchen, beside whichever Hale family member was least likely to draw Marcus's attention. When she contributed to conversations, the responses were polite and brief and did not invite continuation. Marcus, at the other end, talked and laughed and did not notice, or noticed and did not intervene, which amounted to the same thing. At one dinner in the second year, Elena made an observation about a zoning decision she had read about in the Tribune. A land use policy she understood from her former professional life with specificity and depth. Marcus's cousin, Warren Hale, was speaking confidently and incorrectly about the details. Elena corrected him gently, without performance, in the way of someone who simply knows. Marcus looked at her for a moment across the table, then turned back to Warren. "She reads a lot," he said, and the table moved on. "She reads a lot." She filed it away. Then Portia Strand walked into the Hale Foundation's annual benefit at the Langham Hotel on October 14th, and everything that had been deniable became, over the following months, undeniable. Constance had arranged the introduction. Elena would learn this later, but she felt it in real time. The particular warmth Constance extended to Portia that evening, the hand on her elbow, the way she drew Marcus over with a touch that was practiced and precise. Portia moved through the room with the ease of a woman who had decided, early in life, to take up exactly as much space as she required, and not 1 inch less. She was direct and poised and laughed at precisely the right moments. Marcus laughed differently around her. Elena noticed it the way you notice a change in the weather. Not the thing itself, but the air pressure shifting before it arrives. She told herself she was tired. She was 6 months pregnant by then, her full hips wider, her rounded stomach making every chair uncomfortable. The pregnancy exhaustion sitting behind her eyes like something with weight. She told herself that pregnant women were irrational, that she was reading significance into social dynamics because her body was flooding her with hormones and fear. She wanted very much to believe this. For a while she managed it. Then she found the receipt. It was in the inside pocket of the jacket Marcus had left on the bedroom chair. The charcoal Loro Piana he wore on Thursdays, which had become, she realized only in retrospect, a pattern of its own. The receipt was from the Waldorf Astoria on Gold Coast, dated a Thursday 3 weeks prior. 1 room, 1 night. Charged to the Hale Personal American Express. Elena read it once. She read it again. She folded it precisely along its original crease and placed it back in the pocket, smoothing the fabric flat. She was not ready. She knew what she knew, and she was not yet ready to act on it, because acting on it would require dismantling something she was still, somewhere beneath all the evidence, hoping to preserve. That is not weakness. That is love in the process of understanding it has been misplaced. She started watching differently. The absences mapped themselves. A second phone appeared in March, kept in the jacket she no longer searched. Constance began mentioning Portia by name in casual conversation. Portia suggested a restaurant. Portia was at the thing last week, with the comfortable familiarity of someone who no longer feels the need to pretend. At the April dinner, Portia was present. She sat across the table. She was poised and deliberate and said very little to Elena, which was its own kind of declaration. Constance refilled her wine glass before the main course was served. She did not look at Elena's glass. Elena looked at the candles. She kept her hands in her lap, very still. The baby moved against her ribs, one small, insistent pressure, as if to say, "I am still here. We are still here." She did not know yet what would be taken from her next, but something in her body understood that the personal cruelties were almost finished, that what came next would not be about feelings at all. What came next did not arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived the way Marcus did everything by then, cleanly, efficiently, and without the courtesy of a conversation. It was a Tuesday morning in the 7th month. Elena was at the kitchen island eating toast because the baby required food. At intervals, her body no longer negotiated with her, and Marcus came in from wherever he had spent the previous night and set a white envelope on the counter beside her plate. He was already dressed. He did not sit down. "I've simplified the finances," he said. "There's cash in there for household things. $400 a week. It should be more than enough." Elena looked at the envelope. She looked at him. "My cards? Consolidated into the household account, which I'll be managing directly." He adjusted his cufflinks, left first, then right, and picked up his coffee from the machine. "It's cleaner this way, during the pregnancy especially." He left before she could form a sentence that matched what she was feeling. The toast went cold. The envelope sat on the counter like a verdict. $400 a week. For a woman 7 months pregnant in a $14,000 per month penthouse she had believed, until that morning, was partly hers. She did not call anyone. Not yet. She put the envelope in the kitchen drawer, beneath the takeout menus, because she did not know what else to do with it, and she was not ready to look at it again. She told herself there was an explanation, that this was stress, that Marcus was under pressure from the Hale family's finances in ways he had not shared with her, and she was interpreting management as control because she was tired and hormonal and reading the worst into everything. She told herself this for 11 days. Then Constance arrived with a contractor. There had been no discussion, no mention of plans or timelines. Constance simply appeared on a Wednesday afternoon with a man named Robert Pratt from a design firm on Michigan Avenue, and she walked him through the living room and the guest suite as though Elena were not present, pointing at walls and describing finishes and making decisions about cabinetry in a room Elena had furnished herself 2 years prior. When Elena asked what was happening, Constance turned with an expression of patient concern and said, "I'm just helping Marcus get the place into shape, darling. You've had so much on your plate. I didn't want to add to it." She said it the way you say things you have rehearsed until they sound effortless. The contractor returned on Friday, and the following Monday, and the Monday after that. Elena began eating her meals at the kitchen island, which Constance had not yet touched, because it was the only room in the apartment that still looked the way she had left it. She moved through the penthouse like a tenant who had fallen behind on rent and was waiting to see how long before it became official. The irony is worth pausing on. The woman being treated as a temporary resident was, at that precise moment, the controlling beneficiary of the LLC that owned the building's ground lease, the structural systems, the lobby Marcus walked through each morning, the elevator that carried Constance and her contractor to the 42nd floor. Every square foot. She did not know this yet, but the audience does, and it is worth sitting with. Constance redecorating a home she does not own, in a building she does not own, while removing traces of the woman who owns all of it. Then something shifted in a way Elena could not explain away. It was the 3rd week of November. Priya texted a link without comment, just a URL and a single question mark. Elena clicked it from the kitchen island, the baby pressing against her ribs, and found herself reading a society column item in the Chicago Tribune's weekend supplement. The piece was about the Hale family's philanthropic commitments, complimentary and carefully sourced, and tucked into the 3rd paragraph, almost incidentally, was a characterization of Marcus's private circumstances. His wife, described without name, was said to be experiencing a period of emotional fragility, and sources close to the family expressed concern about her dependence on outside support structures during a difficult pregnancy. Emotionally fragile, financially dependent. Elena read the paragraph again. Her breath went shallow and did not recover for a long moment. The phrasing was not general. It was not the language of a journalist who had assembled an impression from multiple accounts. It was specific, it was precise, and it was the same vocabulary Marcus had used in a private argument 2 weeks earlier. The argument she had told no one about, that had taken place in their bedroom at 11 in the morning with the door closed. The words had come from inside this apartment. Someone had placed them in that column deliberately, and Elena understood, her hand flat on the cold marble countertop, that she had been outpaced by something she had not recognized as a campaign until it was already in print. She called her obstetrician, Dr. Renata Osei, and asked about stress and elevated blood pressure, and was told to rest and reduce conflict where possible. She called Priya and said only that things were not good, which Priya understood to mean considerably worse than that. She did not call a lawyer. She was still, at this stage, attempting to manage what was happening from inside the structure of the marriage, which was itself the architecture of her disadvantage. The psychiatric evaluation appeared on a Friday evening, slipped across the dinner table between the main course and whatever silence had replaced conversation in their home. Marcus framed it without inflection. His attorney had suggested it as a standard component of any custody arrangement they should probably formalize before the birth. Routine, he said. Procedural. The name on the letterhead was Dr. Voss-Hale, M.D., practicing at a private clinic in Lincoln Park. Elena read the name. She noted the surname. She set the document down beside her plate and finished her water and said nothing, because she had learned by now that saying nothing was the only thing she still controlled. She did not know yet that Voss-Hale was Constance's younger brother. She only knew the surname. She only knew the feeling in her chest, not fear exactly, but fear's first cousin, the recognition that the ground has been moving beneath you for some time, and that you have only just noticed it is gone. That night she locked the bathroom door and sat on the tile floor, her back against the tub, her full weight on the cold ceramic, and she read the evaluation from the first page to the last. 7 pages. Dr. Voss-Hale had never met her. His conclusions were detailed and confident and entirely invented. She set it face down on the tile. She placed both hands on her stomach, where the baby was quiet and still, and completely, entirely hers. They had moved from words to documents, from whispers to systems, from the personal to the institutional. And she still had not called a lawyer because she was still trying to survive this from the inside. That mistake would not last much longer. The night before, Marcus and Constance had sat in the study. This is the part Elena did not see. This is the part the audience needs to know. It was past 10. The penthouse was quiet in the way it had become. Not peaceful, but evacuated. The silence of a space where warmth had been systematically removed. Marcus was at the desk with a glass of scotch he was not really drinking, and Constance was in the chair across from him in the particular posture she used when she had already made a decision and was waiting for her son to arrive at it himself. The document from Hargrove and Lind was already printed. The security detail, 2 men from the firm Marcus used for site protection, had been contacted that afternoon. The voluntary relocation agreement needed only a signature. Elena's signature, specifically. It was Portia who had suggested the timing. She had sent Marcus a message 3 days prior. Practical, direct, the way Portia communicated when she wanted something and had decided not to dress it up. Elena's prenatal appointment was the following afternoon. The morning before, it would find her rested, alone, and still inside the window before she had legal representation. "Move then," Portia had written. "It lands cleaner." Constance had agreed without being shown the message. She simply knew, the way she always knew, which moment would cost the least and accomplish the most. Marcus had stared at the document for a long time. Then he straightened his cufflinks, picked up the pen, and initialed the sections his attorney had flagged. Elena did not know any of this when she woke at 6:15 to the sound of nothing where a door handle should have been. She had reached for it in the dark, the habitual reach of a woman in her own bedroom, her full body heavy with the pregnancy, her lower back a persistent ache she had stopped mentioning because there was no one left who would receive it with any care. Her hand closed on the handle. It did not move. She tried it again, the way you try a thing you cannot quite believe. And then she stood in the dark bedroom in yesterday's dress and understood that the lock had been changed while she slept. She did not make a sound. She sat back on the edge of the bed and placed her hands on her stomach and breathed. Then she pulled on her cardigan and walked to the guest bathroom, used it, and went to the kitchen. Constance was already there. She was standing at the counter with a coffee she had made from Elena's machine using Elena's pods, wearing a cream blazer over a silk blouse, composed and unhurried as a woman who has arrived at exactly the time she intended. She did not seem surprised to see Elena. She looked at her the way you look at something you have arranged to be moved. "Good morning," Constance said. Elena said nothing. She filled a glass of water from the tap and drank it standing at the sink, looking out the kitchen window at the gray January sky above the city her father had built, block by block, from a warehouse on South Halsted. She did not know that yet, but something in her body was very still. Marcus came in at 6:40 in a suit and tie, the document in his hand. He did not look at her directly. He set it on the kitchen island and slid it toward her and said his attorney had explained everything and it was straightforward and she should just sign it. Behind him, Constance watched with her coffee cup held in both hands, elbows at her sides, the posture of someone in an audience. Elena looked at the document. She looked at Marcus. "There are 2 men in the foyer," she said. "They're just here to help with the suitcase." She looked at the document again. 7 months of baby pressing against her ribs. 3 years of marriage in this apartment, on this floor, in this building whose lobby she had crossed 600 mornings. The document called itself a voluntary relocation agreement. The word voluntary was doing enormous, fraudulent work. She signed it, not because she had no choice, though that is what they believed. She signed it because she understood, in some part of herself she had not yet learned to trust, that a signed piece of paper was a piece of paper, that whatever they thought they were taking from her with a document could also take back. She did not know yet how completely, devastatingly true that was. Constance watched her put the pen down and said, "You were never a Hale, darling. You were always just a guest." The room went very still. Elena looked at her mother-in-law for a long moment, not with fury, not with grief, with the particular quality of attention that belongs to someone who is memorizing something they intend to use later. She did not respond. She picked up her cardigan from the back of the stool and walked to the bedroom to get her suitcase, which she had packed, she realized, without consciously deciding to. Sometime in the weeks of reading custody evaluations on bathroom floors, she had quietly begun preparing to leave. The 2 men from the security firm were professional and silent. They carried her suitcase. They did not meet her eyes. The elevator attendant, Curtis, was not at his post. Someone had ensured he would not be there that morning. The lobby staff at the concierge desk, the doorman Raymond, the young woman at the front desk whose name was Simone, and who had once lent Elena an umbrella without being asked, they looked away, not cruelly, with the particular helplessness of people who witness something they cannot stop and will not forget. The January air hit her at the door. She walked to the edge of the curb and raised her hand, and a cab pulled over. She got in. She gave Priya's address on North Daman Avenue. She settled her hospital bag on the seat beside her and rested her hands on her stomach and looked straight ahead. The cab pulled away from the curb. She did not look back at the building. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived, and everything that had just been done to her began, quietly and without announcement, to reverse. Priya had left the lamp on. It was the small one on the nightstand, the one with the amber shade that turned the spare room warm and low in the evenings. And Elena understood without needing to be told that Priya had left it on deliberately, not as a gesture, not as a statement, but because she was the kind of person who thought about what a room feels like when someone comes back to it alone. Elena had known her for 12 years. She had almost forgotten, in the last 3, what it felt like to be known. She sat on the edge of the bed. The Aldridge and Morrow envelope was where she had left it that morning, the 14 pages spread across the coverlet in the order she had read them. The asset schedule was on top. Page 3 faced upward. She did not look at it yet. She had come back for the other letter, the one that had been folded separately, tucked inside the envelope behind the legal documents, on paper that was not firm and official, but soft, the kind her father had kept in the top drawer of his desk at home. She picked it up. Harold had not been a man of many words on paper. His handwriting was large and unhurried, the blocky print she had grown up with, the one she associated with grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter that said simply, "Back by 6, or "Proud of you," or "Eat something." The letter was 1 page. She read it slowly because he had written it that way, each sentence complete before the next one began, the way he had always spoken. He told her he had watched. He did not offer details or name specific moments, because Harold was not a man who itemized grievances, but he made clear that he had seen Marcus with the particular clarity of someone who had spent 40 years reading the difference between men who built things and men who performed building. He had known, and he had said nothing to Elena directly, not because he doubted her judgment, but because he understood that telling her would have changed the shape of what she needed to find out on her own. He was sorry for the pain that decision had cost her. He said this plainly, without qualification. He told her about the trust. He explained the condition, the separation trigger, the reason for it, the way Diana Reeves had helped him construct a wall around everything Elena would inherit, so that not a single dollar of what he had built could be touched by a man who had not earned it. He told her that Diana had been expecting her call for 14 months, that everything was in order, that all Elena needed to do was be ready. And then, at the bottom of the page, in the same blocky print but pressed in a little harder, the way he pressed when he meant something to last. A Voss does not announce the river. A Voss is the river. The water moves whether or not anyone watches. Elena read it once. She read it again. She set the letter down on the coverlet beside her and sat with it for a long time in the amber light. The first time she had heard those words, she was 12 years old on a tar paper rooftop with the wind coming off the lake and her father's hand on her shoulder, and she had not understood them. She had stored them the way children store things they do not yet have the life to decode. The second time she had heard them, not spoken aloud but surfacing in her own mind, unbidden, during those long months of endurance, they had felt like reproach, like evidence of something she was failing to be. She had pushed them away because she could not yet hear them clearly through the grief and the exhaustion and the steady erosion of who she had been before this apartment, this name, this life she had tried so hard to preserve. She heard them clearly now. Harold had not been telling her to be strategic. He had not been telling her to wait, to plan, to hold her cards. He had been telling her something about her own nature, that she moved, that she had always moved, that the movement did not require announcement or permission or witnesses. She had been the river the entire time. She had simply been in a season of carrying things downstream that did not belong to her, and now the season had changed. She picked up her phone. The name Harold had written at the bottom of the letter, in his own hand, below the river line, was Diana Reeves, Reeves and Shaughnessy, with a number. She dialed it. It rang twice. The voice that answered was compact and unhurried. "Diana Reeves. This is Elena Voss," she said. "Not Elena Hale. Not Elena Voss-Hale. Elena Voss." It came out without decision, the way true things do. A brief pause, then, "I've been expecting this call for 14 months. "I know," Elena said. "I'm ready." "Good. Come in tomorrow at 9. Bring everything they've sent you. We have 3 weeks. The call lasted 4 minutes. Diana did not ask how she was feeling. She did not offer condolences or comfort or any of the verbal padding that people use to soften the edges of difficult conversations. She gave Elena 4 pieces of information in 1 instruction, and when Elena had confirmed each one, she said, 9 o'clock, and the call was over. Elena set the phone on the nightstand beside the lamp. Something had changed in the room, though the room was exactly the same. The amber light was the same. The coverlet was the same. The 14 pages were still spread across it, the asset schedule still face up. But Elena was sitting differently. Not straighter, not harder. Just settled, the way a structure settles when the last load-bearing element is finally in place. She reached for the asset schedule. She turned to page 3. Chicago Portfolio, VCH 041, Meridian Tower, all floors. She read it one more time, and this time she understood not just what it said, but what it meant. Not as a surprise, not as an inheritance, but as a tool. The most precisely designed tool Harold had ever built, constructed quietly over 18 months while he was dying, fitted exactly to the shape of what she would need. She folded the letter along its crease and placed it on top of the schedule. Then she turned off the lamp and lay back on the bed in the dark, her hands on her stomach. And for the first time in 3 years, she did not lie still because she was enduring something. She lay still because she had already decided. The conference room on the 14th floor of Hargrove and Lynn was the kind of room that had been designed to make one side feel at home and the other side feel observed. Long mahogany table, high-back chairs, a view of the Chicago River through floor-to-ceiling glass that Marcus had almost certainly chosen for its psychological effect, the way he chose everything. He arrived first, which was also intentional. He was seated at the head of the table with his lead attorney, Gordon Price of Hargrove and Lynn, to his right, and two junior associates arranged beside him when Elena and Diana walked in at 9 o'clock precisely. Constance was there. Marcus had insisted on it. She sat to his left in a cream blazer. Not the same one from the ejection morning, but so close in shade and intention that it amounted to the same statement. She was composed and still, her hands folded on the table, and she looked at Elena the way she had always looked at her in formal settings, with the patient, proprietorial attention of a woman who has never once doubted the outcome of a room. Elena sat across from Marcus. Diana sat beside her. Elena placed her hands in her lap and kept them there and did not speak. A family court representative, Sylvia Grant, sat at the far end of the table with a notepad and the careful neutrality of someone paid to witness rather than intervene. She had introduced herself in the hallway. She had not made eye contact with Constance. Marcus's attorney, Gordon Price, opened the session. He was thorough and confident. A man who had prepared the psychiatric evaluation as his centerpiece and arranged everything else around it. He spoke for 4 minutes about Elena's documented instability. He referenced Dr. Voss-Hale's findings with precision, citing page numbers. He used the word fragile twice. He used the phrase concerning pattern once. He did not look at Elena while he spoke. He looked at Sylvia Grant, which was where the audience was. Diana let him finish. Then she removed her reading glasses from the chain at her collar, set them on the table, and opened a manila folder. No preamble, no introduction. She placed the first document in front of Sylvia Grant and set a copy in the center of the table where all parties could see. Voss Capital Holdings Deed Registry, Diana said. 1,400 pages. The summary sheet is on top. The room was quiet. Gordon Price looked at the document. He leaned forward slightly. Diana placed the second document. Meridian Tower Lease Agreement. Page 1, Lessor. She turned to that page and set it flat. The lessor's name was printed in the standard font of a standard lease, the kind of text that becomes invisible through familiarity. Voss Capital Holdings, LLC. Page 11, Lessee. She turned to page 11. Marcus J. Hale, his own signature, dated 3 years prior, in the blue ink of his particular pen. Marcus looked at his name on the page. Something happened in his face, not yet understanding, but the first stirring of it. His hand moved toward his cufflinks and stopped. Diana placed the third document. 36 months of rent receipts, Hale personal account, wire transfer, to the Voss Family Irrevocable Trust. Total paid to date, $492,000. She let the number sit. Paid as the documentation shows to his own wife's inheritance. Gordon Price put his pen down. He picked it up again. Constance had not moved. She was still folded and composed, but a line had appeared between her brows that had not been there 4 minutes ago. She was reading the deed registry summary sheet. She was reading the Voss Capital Holdings name. She was reading it the way people read something that refuses, on first encounter, to mean what it says. Diana placed the fourth document. Illinois State Medical Board disciplinary file. Dr. Voss-Hale. 3 prior disciplinary actions. 2 for falsified patient assessments, 1 for financial impropriety in a personal injury case. Current status, pending license review, filed November of last year. She set a copy in front of Sylvia Grant. The psychiatric evaluation submitted by opposing counsel was produced by a member of the Hale family, Constance Hale's younger brother, who has never examined my client, whose license is currently under review, and whose findings are being referred today to the Cook County Family Court for determination of fraud. The junior associate on Marcus's left stopped writing. Gordon Price said carefully, "We were not aware of the familial relationship." Diana looked at him for a moment over her reading glasses. "I know," she said. She placed the fifth document. Corrected lease terms for Meridian Tower, prepared by Aldridge and Morrow on behalf of the Voss Family Irrevocable Trust. The market rate adjustment clause in Section 14 of the original lease was waived by the lessee's team at signing, an error that the trust is now exercising its contractual right to correct. Back rent adjustment, calculated from the date of signing to the date of termination. She set the figure sheet flat. 2.3 million, due upon termination. The room went silent. Marcus's jaw tightened. He was looking at the lease agreement. He was looking at page 1, then page 11, then page 1 again. He was doing the arithmetic that every person in the room had already done. His hand had found his left cufflink and was holding it, not adjusting it, just holding it, the way a man holds something when there is nothing left to straighten. Diana placed the sixth and final document, Notice of Lease Termination, Meridian Tower, Asset Code VCH 041, Voss Capital Holdings Portfolio. Effective 90 days from today's date, no renewal option. She turned the signature page to face the table. Signed, Elena Christine Voss, controlling beneficiary. Then very quietly, as if she had only just remembered something worth noting. Regarding Constance Hale's characterization of my client on the morning of January 14, the suggestion that Mrs. Voss was, and I quote, always just a guest. For the record, and for the court representative's notes, my client was not a guest. On every legal document in this portfolio, she is not Mrs. Hale. She is Elena Christine Voss. She is the landlord. She has been the landlord since before she moved in. Constance spoke. This is absurd. Her voice was steady, but her hand, which had been folded precisely on the table, pressed flat against the mahogany. A small betrayal of effort, the first crack in the composure she had maintained for 2 years. She did not appear to notice she had done it. Marcus reached under the table for his phone. Diana noted it without expression. The table was covered in paper. Every cruelty was answered. The allowance against the back rent. The column item against the email chain Diana had submitted to Sylvia Grant in a separate sealed exhibit. The PR firm's internal correspondence, commissioned by Marcus, flagged for the court record. The morning of the removal against the termination notice, served now across the same table, witnessed by the same world. Elena had not spoken since she entered the room. She looked at Marcus, not at Constance, not at Gordon Price, not at the documents. At Marcus. He was still looking at page 1 of the lease agreement. She waited until he looked up. My father owned this building, she said. Now I do. You have 90 days. She stood. She picked up her bag. She walked to the conference room door and opened it and went through it and did not look back. The elevator was waiting. She stepped in. The doors closed. This time she was not carrying a suitcase. This time her hands were free. What followed was not dramatic. That is worth saying plainly because the audience has been waiting a long time and deserves to know the shape of what comes next. There was no scene of Marcus weeping in a parking garage, no confrontation in a hallway, no moment of public spectacle that gave anyone the satisfaction of watching him break in front of witnesses. What happened instead was quieter and more complete than that. It was the sound of a structure collapsing from the inside, floor by floor, in the language of voicemails unreturned, and contracts unwound, and names removed from documents where they had never belonged. The Hudson development deal, the one Marcus had spent 14 months positioning as the centerpiece of his public rehabilitation, the project he had described at 3 separate investor dinners as generational, required a land use certification that ran through the city's commercial property board. When the Meridian Tower lease termination became part of the public court record, the certification review opened automatically. The board's examiner, a methodical woman named Patricia Osei, found the Voss Capital Holdings filings within 48 hours. She found the back rent adjustment. She found the corrected lease terms. She found, in the appendix Diana had submitted to Sylvia Grant, a deed registry showing that 3 of the Hudson Development's planned anchor parcels shared a legal history with Voss Capital Holdings properties Marcus had used as collateral without disclosure. The deal did not fall so much as dissolve, the way things dissolve when their paperwork no longer holds water. Portia Strand stopped responding to Marcus's calls on the 8th day after the mediation. Not dramatically. She simply did not answer, and then she did not answer again. And by the 10th day, it was clear she had made a decision the way she made all decisions, efficiently, without sentiment, by calculating what remained of value and finding the number insufficient. She was seen 3 weeks later at a foundation benefit in New York, in conversation with a technology executive whose name had appeared twice in the Wall Street Journal that quarter. She did not mention Marcus. She did not need to. Constance returned to her Lake Forest property the afternoon of the mediation and did not call her son that evening or the evening after. Whatever she had expected the morning of the removal, whatever outcome she had dressed for in cream and positioned herself to witness, it was not this. She had prepared for a conclusion. She had gotten one. She simply had not specified which side would be standing when it arrived. Marcus appeared once. He came to Diana's office on West Monroe Street on a Thursday afternoon unannounced and told the receptionist, a young man named Thomas, that he needed 5 minutes. Diana's assistant conveyed the message by phone to Elena, who was already in Carmel by then. Elena's response came back in 2 words, which Diana passed to Thomas, who delivered them to Marcus in the lobby with the particular neutrality of someone performing a professional task. 90 days. Marcus left without responding. Thomas noted in the log he kept for security purposes that Marcus had straightened his cuffs in the lobby before walking out. Old habits. The scene softens now into something quieter. Elena had not known about the Carmel house until the asset schedule. It was listed on page 9 under the California portfolio, asset code VCH0087, a residential property, 17 Pescadero Ridge Road, purchased 1987, unoccupied, maintained in trust. She had read it and moved on because there were 1,147 properties, and she was still learning how to hold the scale of what Harold had left her. It was only later, when Diana's team sent the property photographs as part of the estate inventory, that Elena understood what she was looking at. It was low and white and set back from the cliff edge by a stand of Monterey cypress that Harold had planted himself, Diana told her, the summer he bought the land. The kitchen window faced the Pacific directly. He had driven up from the city on weekends for years, alone or with Elena, when she was small enough to sleep in the back seat without protest. She had no memory of this house. She must have been very young, but when she walked through the front door for the first time, 4 days after her daughter was born, the postpartum tenderness still in her body, the baby against her chest in a carrier Priya had ordered and shipped overnight. Something in the house recognized her, or she recognized it, and she stood in the entry for a long moment and breathed. She found the model on the 3rd day. It was on a shelf in the study, between 2 books on municipal land use that Elena had probably touched as a child without knowing what they were. Harold's Southside books, the ones he had read in the years when he was still figuring out how to own a city legally and permanently. The model was small, hand-built, painted the rust orange of the original warehouse on South Halsted Street. It fit in her palm. She stood in the study holding it for a long time, her daughter asleep in the next room in a crib that had been in this house for 30 years waiting. She carried the model to the kitchen window. The Pacific was doing what it had always done, moving, enormous, without announcement or permission or audience. The way Harold had described power to her when she was 12 years old on a rooftop, and the city was spread below them like a promise she hadn't yet learned to read. She held the model in both hands and looked at the water. A Voss does not announce the river, she said very quietly. A Voss is the river. She did not finish the sentence aloud. She did not need to. The water was moving. It had always been moving. It would keep moving long after this house and its contents and the particular grief and the particular love that had brought her here were resolved into something quieter than memory. This is what the story's really about. Not the documents or the termination notice or the number on page 3 of the asset schedule. Those are the mechanism. The story is about what Harold knew that Marcus never could, that real power does not announce itself. It does not perform or threaten or require an audience. It simply is. It moves. It outlasts the people who tried to contain it, and the people who tried to take credit for it, and the people who stood in a cream blazer in a marble foyer and called the river a guest. The landlord was never who Marcus thought it was. The landlord was the woman who had been paying attention her whole life, learning the language of property and patience and quiet permanence, waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for the morning the inheritance arrived and told her what she had always been. If this story found you at a moment when you needed to hear it, leave a comment below. Tell us what part stayed with you, and tell us where in the world you are listening from. These stories travel farther than we know, and we want to know where they land. Elena stood at the kitchen window until her daughter woke and made the small, insistent sound of someone new to the world who has needs and is not yet embarrassed to name them. Elena turned from the water. She set the model on the windowsill where the morning light would find it. Outside, the Pacific moved. It did not announce itself. It did not look for witnesses. It simply continued, as it had before Harold, before Elena, before any of this. Enormous and indifferent and perpetually, quietly, irrevocably free.